Stop. Okay.
We're live. Ooh, is that a microphone? It's a
Yes.
space
This
station.
is my snowball microphone.
Well, welcome to it's your snowball in the desert. Well, welcome to the 5th episode of the Non-Existent story. I'm Casey, and I'm here with Hannah, who is a relative, along with all of our audience, basically. A very large family. And we are the Non-Existent Story, as I was saying, a storytelling, story listening game podcast where Hannah will tell two stories or summarize two stories, one which exists, one which does not yet exist, and it is my job as the interlocutor to guess which Hannah made up and which one she copied shamelessly. So, Hannah, whenever you're ready.
So shamelessly. Summary 1. It was a memorable year for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Church President Spencer W. Kimball, accompanied by the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, had a revelation instructing them to reverse racial restriction policies held by the church since 1840. President Kimball also announced plans to construct the Jordan River, Utah Temple. The following year, he would... Hello? Yes.
I'm here.
The following year, he would lead the groundbreaking ceremony mounted with helmet on a Caterpillar tractor. Salt Lake City, the Holy Land in the Utahan wilderness, surrounded by mountain ranges, prairies, and lakes, Joseph Smith's Mecca and pilgrimage destination of the faithful. It was summer in 1978, and the faithful were rejoicing, which made what transpired that autumn so jarring. Matthias Slate and his wife, Joanne, had been members of the 15th Ward congregation in the Grantsville, Utah West Stake since pre-adolescence. A younger couple, well-dressed and community-oriented. Mr. Slate was especially respected for starting a dentistry practice while still making time to coach the church baseball team. In fact, 19 witnesses would swear Matthias Slate had been at Wednesday night practice when, between 6 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. on 9 August 1978, Joan Slate was violently murdered in her home. Not that Mr. Slate was the primary suspect for long. As the investigation soon revealed, in 1974, Matthias had begun an affair with another congregation member, someone who seemed to have an appeal to him that Joanne noticeably lacked. The lover was Henry J. Mitchell, a charismatic church elder. 2 days after the murder, Mr. Mitchell was arrested. The 4-year affair between Henry Mitchell and Matthias Slate is a predictable one, perhaps, to the non-orthodox mind. The falsified motel registrations, the lunch dates, the late church meetings that never seemed to reach the church bulletin. It is speculation to question how long Joan Slate knew about it, and Henry Mitchell never said, because the prosecution never got the chance to ask. Days before the first jury selection, Henry Mitchell committed suicide in his cell. His suicide note hinted that Joanne had threatened to inform their stake president if the lovers continued to see each other. When she discovered her coercion had not worked, she attempted to make good on her word. Maybe beknownst and maybe not beknownst to Matthias Slate, Henry Mitchell killed her and attempted to make it look like a break-in gone wrong. The Stake Disciplinary Council posthumously excommunicated Henry J. Mitchell and disfellowshipped Matthias Slate. The distinction being that Mr. Slate, while still a church member, was no longer in good standing. Matthias Slate, however, had left Utah for San Francisco by the time the Stake Council convened, and Salt Lake City has not heard from him since. My first summary will now be followed by a dramatic reading of the excerpt, accompanied by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir performing Over the Rainbow.
Very appropriately.
Can you hear it?
No, not really.
Not at all. Okay.
Well, it's because you have your headphones on, so if you're using the same speakers.
Oh, yeah. Not even now?
Well, again, I think they're going through the headphones.
Oh, okay.
You could play it through a different device. This is something we have to work on.
We have to figure this out.
Yes.
You know what? I'm going to find it on my phone real quick because it's really pretty. Hold on.
Okay, that's fine. I can edit this later, I guess.
Yes.
Where
this will take...
minute one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I can't tell that. But yes, later for the final cut, I can delete this part.
We'll take
say whatever you
moment.
want.
Okay, well, fuck the Mormon Church.
And their tabernacle choir.
No, edit that part out, please. Mormon.
You know, I just added you to my LinkedIn profile. There's a company commander or something like that.
Oh my God,
still
no.
have some sort of professional status.
I'm just a captain, just a lowly. Okay, hold on. I think there's an ad that has to play before. Here we go. It's actually really beautiful. Okay, I'm turning this up loud.
Do they know that that song is about drugs?
I don't know. I don't know if they know about drugs at all.
Do they know? Do they know about beer that is more than 2%? Well, okay. I could hear. Wait, is it playing?
I will now read my excerpt accompanied by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir performing Over the Rainbow on my phone.
Sounds magical.
Henry Mitchell's funeral service was brief and concluded, "The spiritual progression after death and subsequent repentance, though more difficult than in mortality, is possible and necessary for some, for the final judgment will not be until the second coming." The church's stake disciplinary council convened in 2 January 1979 on the misconduct of Elder Henry J. Mitchell. However, of the offenses Elder Mitchell stood accused, murder was not one. The council reasoned the charge inappropriate, considering Henry was never actually convicted in court. Further, his suicide note could not be ethically referenced as a confession without Henry's consent. This was not forthcoming. Instead, Elder Mitchell was found guilty of adultery, homosexual relations, and behavior unbecoming a holder of the Melchizedek priesthood. As a result, he was posthumously excommunicated and remains one of only a handful of people in the Mormon Church to reach that distinction post-mortem. Mr. Mitchell's report of church disciplinary action is filed on permanent record in the office of the First Presidency in Salt Lake City. Matthias Slate's lesser misdemeanors warranted only a ward-level disciplinary council. For adultery and homosexual relations, Mr. Slate was disfellowshipped, meaning no longer eligible to give sermons, teach lessons, offer public prayer, or partake of sacrament. He was, however, still permitted to wear his temple garment, fast, and pay tithing. But the 13th Ward Congregation of Grantsville, Utah, does not know if Matthias Slate elects to do these things or not. Mr. Slate moved to San Francisco 4 days after Henry Mitchell's death, and at the time of this writing, his name is not listed in the California LDS member database. And so concludes my dramatic reading and dramatic singing of the Mormon Church.
This is a juicy scandal.
Yeah, it really is. To be followed by summary 2, but before I do that, I'm going to look up my second YouTube video that I need. Real quick.
Okay. And then while you're doing that, so homosexual relations, assumingly with Matthew Slate.
Correct.
Okay. But then there was also some suspicion, or unless I got confused, about some sort of affair with the late Mrs. Slate, right?
Incorrect. With the still living Mr. Slate.
Okay, so there was never a suspicion of an affair between Mrs. Slate and Henry Mitchell.
Correct.
Gotcha. Ooh, even juicier. So this is a great segue from ancient Greece.
It does seem appropriate, doesn't it?
Indeed.
Hmm.
What would you compare this with?
Okay, I will now read summary 2. This story begins well before the trial, tabloids, and scandal that shook San Bernardino Valley in the autumn of 1964. One must understand how significant it is to shake a place like San Bernardino, where the Mojave haunts quiet spaces between billboards and Santa Ana winds reach 100 miles per hour, particularly between April and October, when it doesn't rain and the wind spikes will correspond with suicide and divorce rates double the national average. It is during one such spike, on the night of 7 October, that Mrs. Lucille Miller ran up and down Banyan Street for over an hour, while Mr. Gordon Miller burnt to death in their Volkswagen. She later explained that Mr. Miller was made tired by migraine medicine, that the car had swerved inexplicably, toppling a gas can in the trunk as it slid down the embankment. She explained this even as she was arrested 12 hours later for murder. Lucille Miller, born Maxwell, married Gordon Cork Miller in 1949, and their unhappy marriage so resembled others that the details are unimportant. Suffice to say, by 1964, they had reached the familiar season of divorce, but had seemed reconciled after counseling. However, the suspicions of the county sheriff's office were solidified with the discovery that Lucille was having an affair with Mr. Arthwell Hayton, San Bernardino attorney and one-time member of the district attorney's office. His wife, Elaine, a close friend of Lucille's, had died in April, presumably from a hairspray allergy. Once discovered, the lovers' breakup was quick, acrimonious, and play-by-play featured in the courtroom. Recordings of phone conversations with Lucille threatening Arthwell with blackmail were played to the jury. Arthwell hosted a press conference to specifically deny that any romance existed between them. Asked by a reporter if he denied having an affair with Mrs. Miller, Mr. Hayton would only reiterate that there had been no romance on his part whatsoever. The trial dragged on for 2 months, and on March 5th, 1965, a visibly pregnant Mrs. Miller was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The story ends in a predictable fashion. The Miller children move in with family friends and are joined 7 months later by the baby, whose father is never specified. The friends attempt to sell Lucille Miller's story to Life magazine, but Life does not want it. Arthwell Hayton marries his children's governess, who had testified on his behalf in court. The death of Arthwell's first wife is never investigated, and the Santa Ana winds blow over the valley. And now I will read a brief excerpt from the story I just summarized. It is accompanied by Clyde McCoy's Sugar Blues as performed in 1931. It was in the breakup that the affair ceased to be in the conventional mode and began to resemble instead the novels of James M. Cain, the movies of the late 1930s, all the dreams in which violence and threats and blackmail are made to seem commonplaces of middle-class life. What was most startling about the case that the state of California was preparing against Lucille Miller was something that had nothing to do with law at all, something that never appeared in the 8-column afternoon headlines, but was always there between them. The revelation that the dream was teaching the dreamers how to live. Here's Lucille Miller talking to her lover sometime in the early summer of 1964, after he had indicated that, on the advice of his minister, he did not intend to see her anymore. First, I'm going to go to that dear pastor of yours and tell him a few things. When I do tell him that, you won't be in the Redlands church anymore. Look, sonny boy, if you think your reputation is going to be ruined, your life won't be worth 2 cents. Here is Arthwell Hayton to Lucille Miller. I'll go to Sheriff Frank Bland and tell him some things that I know about you until you'll wish you never heard of Arthwell Hayton. For an affair between a Seventh-day Adventist dentist's wife and a Seventh-day Adventist personal injury lawyer, it seemed a curious kind of dialogue. It was all, moreover, in the name of love. Everyone involved placed a magical faith in the efficacy of the very word. There was the significance that Lucille Miller saw in Arthwell saying that he loved her, that he did not love Elaine. There was Arthwell insisting later, at the trial, that he had never said it, that he may have whispered sweet nothings in her ear, as her defense hinted that he had whispered in many ears. But he did not remember bestowing upon her the special seal, saying the word, declaring love. There was the summer evening when Lucille Miller and Sandy Slagle followed Arthwell Hayton down to his new boat in its mooring at Newport Beach and untied the lines with Arthwell aboard. Arthwell and a girl with whom he later testified he was drinking hot chocolate and watching television. I did that on purpose, Lucille Miller told a friend of both lovers later, to save myself from letting my heart do something crazy. Problem?
No, well, I didn't hear most of the summary because my internet went out for it, but yours continued. So this makes the guessing game much harder for me. And
that's not quite fair.
But the video will actually be fine because if you're talking and it's recording you, then it should still work, I guess.
Okay. Well, do you want to pause the video and then have me read the summary to you again?
If you can.
Yeah.
Pause it. Can you pause a transmission? A live transmission? I can't actually pause it. So I'll have to just work with what I have, which was really basically the first 3 sentences. It sounded great. The song was really good with it too.
It was. I love the jazz. Yeah.
It set the mood with this kind of like slow, swanky, sleepy. I don't know. I guess to start with kind of just talking about the 2 stories and what they had in common, which I really enjoyed both. I think you set the atmosphere for them both really well without having to go into too much detail, as one does in a summary. So we are right away, because we're in Utah, right, in the 70s, in the first one in 1978. Mm-hmm. Which already just invokes a whole host of images. So we know that we're somewhere rather remote, and kind of in a cult, because the Mormon Church is at this point still pretty, I'm imagining anyway, like somewhat isolated. And we have Matt Slate, who has been accused of the murder of his wife.
Nope. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, Henry Mitchell is accused of the murder of Matt Slate.
So Matt Slate was never even accused?
No,
because I thought he was accused, but his alibi was that he was
suspected. He was suspected.
Right. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So he was suspected, but as many people would later attest, which as soon as you say that suggests that, I don't know, there's something suspicious about it. But everyone would say that he was at the church.
He was the husband. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So the husband is always in that. And both of these are about affairs and these kind of unhappy home lives, which in these desolate, empty landscapes assume, because they are, they assume this very dramatic, epic quality, even though there's something like very, very sordid about them too. So I mean, they would both be great film noirs. The first one I think is a little late because we're in the 70s, but the second one for sure could be a film noir. But yeah, so Matt Slate is suspected but not accused because he has an alibi, which was provided for him by the entire Church. And then Henry Mitchell, the pastor. Is that what they're called?
Well, he's an elder, but that doesn't mean
elder.
pastor in the Mormon
Okay.
Church.
What does it mean? Do they have pastors?
They do, but I don't know that they're called pastors.
Are they called future planetary leaders because they inherit planets after they die?
I don't know if they inherit, or if it's just created for them specifically, like each one. I don't know.
I imagine that they just got them when they already existed. But I guess if it's God giving you things that he could make you one, he wouldn't have, it wouldn't really matter. He could have made it before. It could be new for you.
It sounds like a really poorly edited, like, ShamWow commercial.
Basically, like the used cars of the afterlife.
Get your own plant, yeah. But I mean, not the purpose of the film is not the story. I don't think the original intent or the intent was to mock the Mormon Church, although it does lend itself to.
No, I'm just I'm. It's many. Yeah, I'm mocking it basically. Whoops, I could edit that if I get threats or anything. But yeah, so Henry Mitchell, who is an elder in the church, is then accused of the murder, but he does not go to trial because he commits suicide in the cell, and this creates this interesting sort of bureaucratic problem because you have two competing legal systems in play. One of which is the actual state, which is kind of in the background, at least in this shortened, summary of what would be a much longer story. And then you have this kind of grand inquisition of church judiciary, which is judging and trying, and they can excommunicate, but then they can also defellowshipize. What was the word you used?
Disfellowship,
which is different than excommunicating. It just means that you can't wear the gown.
There's a couple different. It is a relatively severe sentence, but not to the point where you're excommunicated. It's kind of like you're not, I suppose, you're not shunned by the community, but a bunch of stuff that the whole community is expected to do, you can no longer participate in.
Okay. And if you're in somewhere remote where that is the only community, that would actually be quite severe.
Well, Salt Lake City is even now quite remote. I know because I drove through it.
Oh, right, with our mother and your cat. Mm-hmm. So you have these various kind of these weird little bureaucratic hiccups because in order for a suicide note to count, the suicidee would have to affirm it, which he cannot do. So there's a bit of a catch-22 there. Someone should consider rewriting. And then there's this ending moment. The woman is largely absent. The only thing we know about her is that she is like the crime, and that she was in the way or knew something about a homosexual affair, which I don't know how the Mormon Church stands on homosexuality, actually.
They are not pro.
They're not pro. They're not the vanguard of human rights on this topic.
No. There was some actually recently. We're recently here being defined as 2 years ago, a year ago. There was a big uproar because they were expecting the Mormon Church to change its policy on gay marriage, and it didn't. It falls under apostasy in the Mormon Church.
Ah, okay. And then I guess the other thing with the specificity of the year, which as a literary device creates an added sense of realism, because with any legal drama, you summarize it as if it were kind of a case summary, right? So you get the date, the time, the place, and it lends itself well to this kind of exercise, I think, of just summarizing. So you get all the juicy stuff, and then it leaves so much to the imagination, because if you've watched any crime drama or any movie, you know that what happens in the court and what has actually happened are usually the opposite or much more complicated. And then there's that last moment which suggests that the real I don't want to say bad guy, but that somehow Matt Slate has gotten away with a lot more than he perhaps should have, because he just disappears and is never heard from again, and he moves to San Francisco, which is just in time for the activity of San Francisco in the 80s, which I'm sure he probably would have enjoyed. It's a good time to be in San Francisco. But yeah, so yeah, it was quite pithy. You were very summary in your summary. And then the second one we have, okay, so we have it's a bit, we begin with this, we're in Santa Ana, California, which is further south, right?
Well, San Bernardino Valley,
San Bernardino.
With the Santa Ana winds.
The Santa Ana winds. Okay. And they're called Santa Ana, like, okay, why are they called Santa Ana winds?
I think it's like a seasonal phenomenon between, and the essay says, and I don't know how much you heard, I assume almost all of it. The
summary I got all of. I missed most of the excerpt, which makes this harder.
Okay. Yeah.
That's usually where all the tells are.
No. So the Santa Ana, there's dry and there's wet seasons, and in California it's even, the dry seasons are even more pronounced, as you see now by the drought that's been going on for like 4,000 years in California. And the Santa Ana winds, I believe, are part of a seasonal something to do with weather thing that happens, and so they get really bad during a certain time of year, and the heat spikes and the winds are roaring into this valley, and the weather corresponds, which is actually true, with I believe, with a higher rate of suicides and divorce during that particular season than for the rest of the year.
I thought that detail was amazing, that that there's this, even just as a flight of fancy, because I mean, lots of things with like crime, as you know, rises in the summer, especially in major cities and things like that, and that makes sense. But high winds or anything that makes you uncomfortable and irritable, I'm sure would tend to produce friction in your personal relationships. But this idea that these very artificial human customs, and not that suicide is that artificial, but generally speaking, it is the property of rational human beings. Animals do not generally kill themselves. And then divorce would somehow be related to these natural cyclical phenomenons. So this tie between this kind of like, you know, this society and this more or less corrupt state. And I think both of the communities or societies that, or groups of people that you depict, are extremely corrupt and mendacious and conniving, and there are affairs, but there's no real sense of loyalty or love even in these affairs. You know, it's so film noir in the sense of this constant betrayal, right? And also, yeah, and this kind of middle classness, so that it might seem quite nice on the surface, but then immediately below, then the sort of Mad Men effect, if you will. Everyone is doing everyone, and everyone's about to betray everyone else, and everyone's pretty much willing to kill each other's spouse. And then, so we start with, so you have this screaming wind, which is a great image, and then along with the screaming wind rushing through, you have this screaming woman rushing down the street. So she's embodied like her some sort of spirit animal or something, this natural state. And well, her husband burns to death in an automobile. And then there's a great line about their unhappy marriage was so boringly unhappy that there's not even anything to say. Which is or something like it was unnecessary to talk about the details because it was so typical in its unhappiness, or something like that. Is that how it was? What was the exact line?
Let me pull it up, because you froze a little bit. Blah, 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 blah. Their unhappy marriage so resembled others that the details are unimportant. Suffice to say, by 1964, they had reached the familiar season of divorce, but had seemed reconciled after counsel.
That's a great detail too. But it seemed so this whole like appearance versus reality thing that is really hard to play with in these like very pithy forms that we're working with. But I mean, not to bring up Anna Karenina all the time, but you know, there's the famous line where like all happy families are alike, each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And actually, no. Sometimes people are just really unhappy in a totally boring way. Because it's that conventional. So there's no sympathetic characters at all. So you know, she's having an affair with an attorney, and it's I almost envision this as a sort of American Beauty kind of thing where everyone's kind of despicable, and there's also a certain ambition or ladder climbing involved, but in kind of a petty way. And then his wife had mysteriously died of a hairspray allergy, which is suspicious to say the least. I'm wondering if yeah, I mean, there's no criminal there, but of course one would suspect the spouse because double indemnity in every murder mystery ever has taught us to do that. Hercule Poirot in particular. And then she ends up pregnant, which I thought was interesting because she had been originally married in 1949. And this takes place, as your last story did, in 1964, also having to do with hair. Interestingly, this is hard. This is a tricky one. But then she ends up pregnant. So, but this trial has gone on. So how long between the sentence and the husband's death? How much time has passed?
She was arrested 12 hours after the incident was reported.
Okay. And then when was she actually sentenced? Because there's a trial, and trials take a long time.
Well, her trial only took 2 months.
Oh, okay. So there's the grounds for suspicion, but then the attorney is ready to get rid of someone who's kind of besmirching his public name as a public figure, and so there's these kind of orphan children, and then this great moment where who tries to sell the story to life? Is it her, or is it him, or is it someone else?
No, well, she's in jail and he's off somewhere else, and she has 3 other children, so it's not just the baby. They had a little family, and the kids ended up moving in with family friends.
Okay, so this is the children that she had with Gordon
Correct.
Cork Miller.
Yes, Cork Miller. And the friends that were taking care of the children tried to sell her story to the Life magazine.
The friends. Okay, so the charitable. This is Dickensian. There's always these people who kind of like take in children and they seem all charitable. I'm thinking of Bleak House or something, and then they end up being totally negligent and actually kind of trying to make a pretty penny, as it were, from the situation, and life doesn't want it. So this is something that's too vulgar and for life, too tabloidish or something like that. In 1964. So I think so I have to choose which one you did, and this is hard.
I can read the excerpt again, and I can try to be even more dramatic with it. So I don't know.
No. You recorded it. I think it makes it even more challenging because I think I like the challenge of it. All right, so you picked 1964 and hairspray in the second one, which suggests a relationship with the previous one, which you did right. Stylistically, I would say I don't know. The Santa Ana wind is so specific. Like I would be, and you don't know that much about California unless you did a lot of research before. So I would think that you would do that one. You would not have done that one, and I would also think that the Mormon Church might interest you more because as our mother's daughter. And our aunt's niece, a good juicy religious true crime mystery could not. That would naturally be your cup of tea, as it were, cup of alcohol free So I guess the presence of the church in the first one suggests more your style. However, there's certain similarities between this one and the last one that you wrote, or between the second one. Oh man, this is hard. I'm gonna say, and I'm already down by one. You already have one advantage over me, but I'm going to say that you wrote the Mormon one, and that the second one is by someone else whom I do not know.
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, hey.
Yes.
Okay.
The second one is actually not just it was not a work of fiction. It was an actual crime.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I guess I could say that too. Like they don't have to be. They don't have to be stories. I mean, like. So the second one is.
It's true.
Is it a movie? It sounds like I envisioned Jimmy Stewart or someone, not Jimmy Stewart.
I think there's some sort of crime show. I think that ended up doing a special on it in like the 2000s. But Joan Didion, if you've heard of her, wrote her essay. Well, it's called, what is it called? Let me move the thingy. It's called Some Dreamers of the Golden Dream, and Joan Didion wrote it in a short essay within her book entitled Slouching Towards Bethlehem in 1966.
I've heard of Slouching Towards Bethlehem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. No, so this is a great like America, like the dark side of America in the 60s kind of thing then.
Yeah, she's very dark. It was actually the most difficult one that I've tackled because I don't like, and I tend to stay away from the darker because it depresses me, and then trying to copy this style is also a big downer for me. But I love the element of the absurd within the case.
Yes.
So which didn't, I don't know that it necessarily came across so much in the summary. Hopefully because you made the connection with the Santa Ana winds. But if you read her essay on it, which is only a few relatively short pages, the crime itself is really almost like a minor part of the story. The bigger focus is on San Bernardino and things like the weather and how it affects people, and the dream that people have when they come, and how everything is very much an illusion, and then people cope in different ways by creating illusions in their own mind to compensate for it. And it's very dark and depressing and like beautifully written. And so it seemed as though the murder and the affair was just a matter of course in such a setting as this, and really so typical in so many ways. And the only thing unique about it was this bizarre exchange in the courtroom between Lucille Miller and Arthwell Hayton. They have like this really open, petty breakup between like this middle to high society. She was a Seventh-day Adventist, and so is he. So. Okay. So they're having this really petty breakup like in a courtroom, and then he hosts a news conference out of his office just so he can say there was no romance between them, when he's already confessed that they had an affair in court. He says, "I just want you to know there was no romance whatsoever." It's like it was very important to him to put that.
It was just sex. There's nothing romantic.
Yeah, and then he had his governess testify for him as a character witness in court. And then after Lucille Miller was arrested, he married the governess, like within the same year. And and also it wasn't, I don't think they never, of course, investigated his wife's death because I guess he was a higher member of society. Mm-hmm. I don't know why, but. The last person to see her alive, I believe, besides one of his children, was Lucille. She was staying at the house that night. So Arthwell had flown out of town, and he called the house the night that his wife died. And Lucille answered the phone and said that his wife was in the shower. And then they find his wife dead in bed the next morning. And they did an autopsy like much later and found there were like barbiturates, and it was strange how she was dressed, but they still never investigated it.
Yeah, no, he just knew someone in the police. at the police station, basically. I'm sure, well, he was a prosecutor, right?
Well,
So,
by the time that this happened, he was like an injury lawsuit sort of lawyer. But before this came out, he had worked in the district attorney's office.
okay. So he pulled some strings so that they didn't waste any valuable resources on the case. Yeah, that's amazing. And this is a totally a true story.
This is all completely true, yeah.
Did anything happen once she published this? Like, what were the circumstances of like her investigation? Like, how did she find this out? How was it published? How was it received? Was he still alive? You know anything about that?
No, I mean, when I did my research on this story, he died at the ripe old age, and I think he was still married to the governess woman at the time, although I'm not sure. So I guess he eventually had a marriage that didn't end in, him killing her or letting her get killed in some way, which is good. And
progress.
Which is, yeah, an upgrade. And I mean, it's just so in the end, Lucille's husband is dead, and probably due to Lucille. Lucille's lover's wife is dead, probably also due to Lucille. Lucille's in prison. All of her children are living with like family friends who are also lawyers who are trying to sell her story to Life magazine. And in the meantime, the guy that she does all this for, who knew all about it, is married the young, pretty governess from Norway. And within the same year of her being sent into prison, and he's just fine. So that was interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a man's world, but
especially in
I think also like how you could get someone to do all of your dirty work and take all the hits, and if that person is desperate and miserable enough, even if they have a ostensibly acceptable life, they probably would. So I mean, again, it's so interesting, just like kind of like with the ancient ones, that you never get like, and then so and so thought, or like you never get that like voyeuristic peek into their head. It's just a description of events, and the more you like think about it and talk about it, the more you realize that there's actually quite a number of things that could have been going on, and you get a sense of exploitation and things like that. But like the nature of the relationship, or how even such people, like what kind of affair do even people like that, what kind of passion could they have? Like it all like, I don't know. It just seems like, it seems hard for me to imagine. And there are many cases like this, right, of affairs and then violence and then spouses being outed and stuff. But I've always found it hard to imagine that someone who's capable of so much conniving and backstabbing, how they could ever really be like passionate, because it seems like they would just be kind of cold and calculating, and there's no real love at any point.
No,
like they all seem incapable of love. So the fact that they're all crimes of passion is somehow unthinkable. I guess that's what I'm saying.
I guess that's an aspect of the essay that is so impressive, is it doesn't investigate their capability of love so much as their idea that it's a thing. So you missed this in the excerpt, but it talks about how everyone involved is so obsessed with the efficacy of love, and how Arthwell hosted a press conference just to make sure they knew that whatever happened, he wasn't in love with her. And then
interesting. Really?
She talks about how she'd followed him one day with like a close friend to see what he was doing down to his boat, because he was with another woman. And they went onto his boat, and she stayed out, and she like untied the attachment up between the boat and the dock so they would like drift away. And she said that she did that so that she could keep her heart from doing something crazy, is her words, as though committing, murder of her husband wasn't. So it was all about the idea, and then that was the link between the place, the San Bernardino Valley, and how it draws people in with a promise that is completely illusion. And then they create their own illusion in their minds of something that isn't actually there. And then they do all of these horrible things that are their true natures. But as long as they have this idea in their heads, it's an illusion. It's not real, but it's making what they do temporary and everything is, you're looking to the future and that's to the side and you were in the right the whole time and it just happened and let's go. And it's so very, I don't know, it's unable to look forward and recognize things as they really are, because more importantly is to maintain how you desire them to be.
Yeah, and even if the things that you desire are good, I mean, to again simplify it, but like noble or admirable things, like the idea of love are a very false, it's like a very distorted, like you take all these things and everything becomes terribly distorted because people are reaching out to them out of a sense of like desperation and falseness. And it kind of makes me think of like a Tennessee Williams situation almost, where like these like people, you know, burn alive and it's hot. Like there's always like this sense, because it's in the South and it's like always the summer and it's like totally hot. And so like in both you kind of get this sense of like everything is kind of weighed down by like these ideas that people live out but are incapable of living up to. But a part of them, and maybe this is the good part of them or whatever, what's left, realizes that, and then they're hankering for something that's like authentic. They find themselves doing the most abhorrent, violent acts. And but at the same time you never feel that bad as a viewer or a listener or a reader, because it's still somewhat, everyone's so past saving and so lacking in any innocence that that you don't suffer for their suffering in the same way. But I really like the way that you described it as like, so these compensatory illusions that they create, and it's when they act on these compensatory illusions that the kind of bloodshed ensues. Except for, and this is, have you ever seen this show Twin Peaks?
Mom has told me many times to watch it, and I have not.
Our mother.
When
did Mom watch it?
I don't know. She's obsessed with Twin Peaks, though. She didn't tell you about it? Oh my, she's told me about it at least 30 times.
She has told me about it. Cody and I went on the radio. We watched it together, and we went on like the actual radio in Chicago in a big like Gothic skyscraper, and we talked about this show. And I have like, I'm recorded as expressing my mostly uninformed opinion about this show, but and I think we recommended it to her, but she never talked to me about it. Maybe she got confused about which daughter recommended it.
No, she keeps telling me to watch it.
Well, you should. It's quite good. But there's a figure in this small, corrupt, depraved town where there's still this desire for passion, but there's something kind of missing. Like it all seems kind of performed. It's very California. There's something, you get the sense that David Lynch or any of these shows are written by someone who spent a long time in California, because people have these dreams and they go there and they're crushed. Like that's like the California narrative. And they don't make it. But there's this central figure, and it's actually set in like Oregon or Washington State or somewhere further north in the country with big fir trees. And there's a central figure who's kind of like this CEO entrepreneur. And at least in the first season, he has these affairs, but at the same time, like people can end up in jail and betrayed. And so like there are these, he is like sleeping with people, but at the sense, there's also like some sense of like business transaction or some sort of social capital is being negotiated, even as you're like, licking so-and-so's toes. Like, it's like, it's very odd. But it made me, that he kind of sound, he's like an Arthwell Hayton. Is that what his name? Arthwell Hayton. But then, so to go to the Mormon one, which I think is definitely like worth developing because of all the very nice details about church distinctions between different kinds of crime and how they deal with this and how they categorize it. And there's this, they don't actually have that much power. Like it's still, like someone was murdered, like the church isn't going to decide all this, but they make all these distinctions and they intervene and they have all these little like, so there's this like kind of like parallel mock trial taking place, as it were. But that part I think is really good. And then some of the characters like the Matt Slate and whatever, who just becomes like this mysterious figure who kind of almost sets up his lover and then escapes. But what would you call it if you were to? What would you change? What would you develop? Like, what would you add? What would you call it?
I would call it so Joan Didion's essay is called Some Dreamers of the Golden Dream. And I would call this one Some Pillars of the Salt Lands, I think, because of Salt Lake City and also the pillars of salt within the church. And there's just this kind of really, I always found that story of Lot's wife so blatantly absurd. And I think it was appropriate.
It's a good one. It's one of the most memorable. I mean, there aren't that many cases in the Bible in which someone has like a spell cast on them and like transforms into something. Like I think of that more as like a Tolkien thing, like, you know, the trolls stay out and then they turn to stone or something. But like the fact that someone is turned into salt, like it's I think it's the only. There's no other record of that. I don't think there's any explanation as to why it's salt. So
it's a one-time thing, yeah.
Yeah. So I like that. So dreams of what did you say?
The Joan Didion's was called
Save Dreamers of the Golden Dream, right?
Some dreamers of the Golden Dream. And mine would be called Some Pillars of the Salt Lands.
Some Pillars of the Salt Lands. It's good. I like it.
Yeah.
And what would you add or develop? Like if you were just to pick one thing to kind of zoom in on and expand, what would you do?
I don't know. I was so focused on what I see is the absurdities of the Mormon Church. And then I wanted some kind of justice for Mr. Miller, who was killed by Lucille Miller, I believe. And he was a dentist. So I was like, I'm going to write a story where one of the spouses is a dentist and he's going to get away and be fine and everyone else is going to die. And I feel I've accomplished that. But I think that the affair, so it was an interesting idea to me that they're all growing up within this church, which is very common within the Mormon Church. You're very integrated. It's a very tight community. And so from pre-adolescence, all three of these people really, although I only mentioned the spouses, grow up in this church. Although that's also very common, is you grow up and you see other guys as a woman or vice versa, and then you both go off to your missions and you come back, and then the women in that want to get married right away, and you start having lots of little Mormon bebes, and the cycle continues. So you're part of that, and you follow that formula, but then you're married to someone who's a homosexual, and you find out, and it doesn't specify what period, but I would probably say a little bit later on, that at least for like 2 or 3 years, your husband is having an affair with an elder in the church, which is a senior member with a lot of additional knowledge that everyone's supposed to respect. And rather notoriously, this sometimes happen between elders and wives in Mormon churches, a little less common between elders and their husbands, because I don't know that I don't think they can. I'm not sure. I don't think they can. I did have to do some amount of research on this one. But you find out that your husband is having an affair, but you're more concerned with, you don't divorce him, and you don't immediately contact any church authority because you're more concerned with how it looks.
Right.
And you want to maintain how you like things looking now. So you blackmail an elder in the church and say, if you guys don't cut this shit out, I'm gonna tell on you. And so that sense of trying to maintain the facade in order to appear like you're succeeding in something that's absolutely, why would anyone even want to succeed in this kind of circumstance? But they do. And then you end up dying for it. And I found that aspect of it to be compelling. It balanced for me
going into the discovery, and then the wife's attempts that prove ultimately ill-fated to try to manipulate the situation, because it seems like it would be important to the story and the general tone of the story that she not be too sympathetic. That you would want this to be a conniving situation in which the appearances and this intrinsic, you know, mendacity of each character was exposed. And again, and murder mysteries are always more enjoyable when you don't feel bad for the person who dies. Like, it's just a thing. Like, I mean, at least the ones that I've read, maybe because I read like older ones, but it's usually someone who's a bit naughty, and so you don't shed too many tears, and that way you can just focus on like the thrill of the hunt and the deductions of the detective, and not have to feel sad.
Yeah. So I would say that I would focus more on that aspect of the story. If I would,
that makes sense. I would too. I like that. Although I do like the courtroom protocol and this regulations. I think those were really good details.
All true, as I have discovered through Wikipedia. There's, depending on your transgression, the church has different levels of counsel that will confer, and it'll even give you details of like the different people that are supposed to be on the panel. Like, there's the high council, and then the president and the president's 2 council members. And then if it's something with the archbishop's family or something to do with murder, then you go to the next level, which is the stake level, and a stake is composed of X number of congregations, of which is composed of X number of smaller churches, and then there's this many, and it's if you ever study the structure of the Mormon Church, it does make me think of a science fiction story.
No, or like Russia under Peter the Great, where you have the 12 civil levels, which correspond with like the 12 military levels, like highly hierarchical structured societies
that sound really freaking made up.
Yeah.
And actually, like the quorum of the 12 apostles is real shit, and they're very high freaking ranking guys, and they work with the presidency of the Mormon Church, elected by God, according to him. Although it's usually the senior person of the quorum of the 12, and after the president dies, God almost invariably says the senior of the quorum of the 12 will become the next president, and then it happens as if by magic.
Wait, so they use president and they just say election as if it were democratic, but it's God?
Yes, God elects them, and God gives them revelation. So in 1978, God, because of some craziness that was going on in Brazil, gave, and this was the wording straight out of the Mormons' website, gave a revelation to the quorum of the 12 apostles and President Spencer W. Kimball to revise their racial restriction policies in the church. At the same time, they prayed, and then he told them, and then they changed it.
Like a country club, which is, I think that's actually about the time that country clubs started getting rid of their no Jew policy and things like that. Which, like, in the case of like Evanston, which is where I went to graduate school, like I think that the neighborhood north and then the country club had like a no Jews allowed policy until like the end of the 1970s. I don't know if God spoke to them. It's possible. But
did he reveal to them that they should change their mind?
Explain. He made a PowerPoint, actually.
He sent them a memo, and it was said.
He invited them to his LinkedIn network. He explained
that this was no longer a good idea.
Oh, I had no idea.
Before, but into the future, maybe consider, for your consideration, changing or adjusting your policies for the future. And so that was
love God.
P.S. But you're my favorite.
No. Thumbprint. Or a paw or something. That is you can't make this shit up. No. I mean, someone did, so you can, but someone really, really creative. Like this quorum thing. Okay, well, that was excellent, and you're raising the bar again for historical research alone. So this will be intense next time. I will. Any closing thoughts or feelings on the process of writing or reading or researching, or would you become a Mormon? Would you move to San Bernardino? Any life lessons to be drawn from this?
Oh God, I hope not. No life lessons, no morals or
Yeah, what is the moral of
the
this
moral
story?
of the story is if you are going to be a Mormon and commit a crime, wait until you're above the level of elder to do it. And if you do live in San Bernardino, you should vacation when it gets really hot somewhere else.
Yes, so
It's cool.
the wind doesn't drive you mad.
Drive you mad.
and scene. I'm gonna call it there.